Today, we'd like to concentrate on talking about what some of the infrastructure needs of the county are long-term, the capital needs, and talk about what the impact of that may be and how we afford that. We have a couple of presenters, several presenters with us today. Ken Roy, from the Chief of Facility, or what's your formal title, Ken?
Chief Facilities Officer.
In the Board of Education. Going to talk about the needs of the Board of Education. Jim Irvin is the Director of Department of Public Works, is going to talk about the infrastructure needs of the non-education section of the county. Jim Caldwell, who's our stormwater management manager, I guess or what your title is going to talk about the stormwater needs and the new mandates that have been placed upon the county for stormwater and the impact that that's going to have. And Lynn Coleman is going to talk about the needs of the community college as we go forward. So I'd like each speaker to come up here to speak when their turn comes, so that we can put them on video, so people who can't attend the meeting can at least find out, take a look at the video. So Ken, if you want to come on up and we'll get started.
Got the click through.
You got to push the button.
Oh, okay. Good morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about infrastructure from an education perspective. Well, Jim would probably not say because he's polite, or maybe he would, but if we weren't spending so much on education, maybe we could address some of the critical infrastructure needs in the rest of the county. But we do spend a lot on education, and I'm going to talk more about that.
Bottom right.
Bottom right. There you go. So this is just a slide from, I think it was last week. Can we afford to maintain the infrastructure? The process that we use at the school system is we start with a feasibility study in June. And then what that feasibility study does is it says we have these needs throughout the county in terms of growth, whether it's coming from Route 1 or downtown Columbia or existing housing. How do we accommodate that growth? And that translates into capital budget needs, where we say, we can't handle the growth along Route 1, so we need to build a new elementary school, a new middle school, and that gets cranked into the budget. Once the growth needs get cranked into the capital budget, the next thing we look at is how do we maintain our current infrastructure? We have about 75 instructional buildings. And so how do we keep all 75 of those in the same condition as the newest buildings that we have, or as close to the condition as we can maintain it with the money available? And so all of that gets considered and put into the capital budget, which gets presented in September to the Board of Education. That's out of sequence with the rest of the county because we have to submit a state capital budget in October to the state. And we get about 30% of our funding from the state. The remaining 70% comes from the county. We once again submit another capital budget in February, which goes into the county executive's budget in mid-April, and then we are in sequence with the rest of county government until the budget is approved in May. Over the last 10 years, the bottom line, the red line, is what we have been funded in the capital budget, total funding from both state and county. And as you can see, it's actually, you can call it steady, but it's actually been declining. It's over the last 5 years or so, it's been averaging about $70 million, a little over $70 million a year, total capital funding for the system. The upper line is the state dollars per square foot numbers that they give out every year when you put together your capital budget. And the allocations that the state provides are based on that dollar per square foot number. So over the last 10 years, the state construction numbers have gone from about $150 per square foot to $250 per square foot. And you can see that trend line just shows that it's steadily going up. What was happening about 3, 4, 5 years ago, where you see that north field, because of the depressed economy, we were getting excellent pricing from the contractors. They were essentially ready to work for us even at a loss or no profit, just to stay in business. And if you look at the last 5 major renovations, I say 4, I think it's 5 major renovations that we have executed, renovations like Atholton High School, Phelps Luck Elementary School, Stephen Forrest Elementary School, you look across those latest contracts, we're averaging about $230 per square foot for those projects. So the economy is rebounding, good for the economy, bad for capital budgets. Jeff talked about last week about, how do we plan growth in the county. We talked a little bit about AppFo. If you looked at the FY07 capital budget from the school system, and you looked at what we call our pre and post measures, we have charts in the capital budget that say if we do nothing, here's what our school system is going to look like, and more specifically, these areas will be closed for growth because these schools will be over capacity. And then there's a post measure that says if you fund this capital budget with the plans we have in the capital budget and the additions and the new schools that we would plan to build, here's what it's going to look like afterwards. So again, if you reflect back to the FY07 capital budget in this first column here, and then in the red, that was what the FY07 capital budget said we would look like in FY14. Or not, I'm sorry, FY15. The second column here reflects the FY15 capital budget, the one that is currently being submitted. And so what this says is that we've done an excellent job of keeping up with growth in the county. We have a couple more schools that are closed, but we have actually fewer that are under what we call our standard. And so in a macro level, what we said we would do in FY07, we've done. We've kept up with the growth. At the same time, if you look at the total utilization of schools, we've gone from 95% projected utilization to over 96% utilization as a school system. I don't know how many of you have ever attended or watched or listened to your neighbors talking about redistricting, but I get to hear a lot of that. And, from the county's perspective, one might say we don't do enough. From every parent in the county, they would say we do too much. And I think what this reflects is a good balance between redistricting and just building new schools. So that's the new seat component. The other component of the capital budget is this. We have, again, 75 instructional buildings. They may have a nice coat of paint on the wall. They may have, some bright interiors, but you get concerned as a maintenance person of what's inside the walls. And this is a good example. We had a major addition at Glenelg High School that was postponed for many years because of some issues with the septic system. And we eventually got to build it, and we spent a lot of money at Glenelg High School. But in the era that was planned, we were only looking at seats. We weren't looking at inside the walls. And so right after we built that addition, came to realize that we still had to address this. And I'll show you in the next couple of charts, with mechanical infrastructure, it doesn't fail instantaneously. It degrades over time. And you can live with this to some point, but eventually you have to address it.
What is it that we were looking at?
Oh, that?
Yeah.
That is actually the HVAC, heating and cooling piping in the school, which was replaced at a price tag of almost $5 million eventually. But yeah, so if that looks like that on the outside, you can only imagine what it looks like on the inside. So this is a curve that, the point of it is, and there's different versions of it, there's the bathtub curve, there's other curves, but the bottom line is because mechanical things don't tend to fail instantaneously, they degrade over time. You don't want to replace things too early because there's a very high cost to maintaining systems at 100% of their design capacity. There's just not enough money in the world to do, keep all 75 schools like the day they were built. On the other hand, if something is designed to be replaced at 20 years or 25 years, and you wait 40 years, the bill to bring it back up to that original design is tremendous and unaffordable. So the trick is somewheres, in this curve, you got to pick the right time to replace things. Otherwise, you create a backlog that you can never recover from. And then all of a sudden, you're running around the county when the weather's like this, and you have multiple failures that then create damage, that create higher bills, that, goes on and on. So it's a real art, which nobody has perfected, but that's what you're dealing with. To put it in context, this wasn't us, but this was a consultant who was doing studies for various school systems in Maryland and Virginia. So we are here, and this graph shows the percent of dollars that school systems in Maryland and Virginia are putting towards capital replacement. The ideal, according to some people, is between 2 to 4% of your capital replacement value should be spent on deferred maintenance, renewing infrastructure. We're at less than 1%. The average of everybody is less than 1%. But I guess the takeaway would be we're better than most in Maryland. This is Montgomery and Prince George's. So we're better than most of the school systems in Maryland in investing in our infrastructure. But interestingly enough, if you look at Virginia, here's Fairfax, Loudoun, Arlington, Prince William. On average, they tend to invest more than we do. So, again, my major takeaway would be, we do care about infrastructure. We are spending money, perhaps not enough, but we're not letting it rot away.
What's that ratio of, sir, the total value of your capital improvements?
It's the percent of your total physical plan. If you take your total value of your assets,
Right.
this is the percent on an annual basis that you're reinvesting back into them.
For preventive maintenance and upkeep and all that?
Renewing systems,
Right,
anything other than putting new buildings up.
The interesting thing, Carroll County hasn't been growing its population. It
Yeah.
hasn't been growing its students, so they have less needs for new schools.
Right.
That's kind of, so they probably have
Mm-hmm.
the capacity to put
Sure.
more into their existing stuff.
Yeah.
So if you took Carroll out of there, the average would drop to where we are.
Yeah.
right? Or below.
Yeah. So here's one of the nice slides that Jeff showed us last week. If you look at the planned growth for Columbia, there's actually 6 schools that I would say are right along the northern crescent of the planned development. Those schools are Bryant Woods, Longfellow, Running Brook, and Swansfield Elementary Schools, Wild Lake Middle School, and Wild Lake High School. If you take Wild Lake High School out of the mix, because that was replaced in 1996, the other 5 schools, 4 elementary and 1 middle, were all built between 1968 and 1972. Of those schools, Bryant Woods was renovated in the early 2000s. Running Brook was also renovated in the early 2000s. Swansfield really hasn't had a major renovation in quite some time. The middle school, we're actually just got approved to do a replacement school, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then Longfellow Elementary School is starting its renovation in about 2 or 3 months. The contracts have been awarded, and it's just getting started. So I don't know how many of you have actually been in any of these schools. Anybody been in any of those schools I mentioned? Okay. So if you go into those schools, I would say, from my perspective as a facility manager, they're bright, they're clean, they're nice schools. but they also reflect an educational philosophy and they're 40 years old. I mean, they're dated. They don't have the same space that we teach our modern instruction in. What's behind the walls? Hopefully they don't look like that pipe I showed you from Glenelg High School, but they're getting there. Some of those pieces of the infrastructures are 40 years old. So, if we were just looking and saying, okay, are those 5 schools, meet our needs for today? We'd say, yeah. But if we're looking at what's coming out of this area in terms of growth, more students, more needs, we're not going to be able to just not reinvest in those schools for the next 20 years. We're going to have to do some degree of reinvestment. So let me go back to Wild Lake Middle School. Wild Lake Middle School has just been approved by the state. It's going to be one of the first 3 net zero energy schools in the state. It's going to be totally replaced there's going to be another building built on campus that's brand new, state of the art. Again, reflective of the newest, the best that we have here in the state, not just in Howard County. And that'll be done, if we get the funding, in about 3 years.
Can I just have a quick question? What's the life cycle of a modern school now? I mean, are you projecting out 40 plus years, 50 years?
Yeah, Howard and Glenelg both have many years ahead of them. They were both built in the 50s. West Friendship was built in the 20s. So, yeah, we can certainly get 50 years of life or more out of a building. The question is if you don't invest in it and renew those pipes, pretty soon they get to the point where you have to knock it down and start over again. So you're right on. That's the point. Is if we want those school buildings to last, if we want to, not have to build a new school every time, we have to keep reinvesting.
So why are we replacing Wild Lake Middle School instead of?
The reason that we're replacing it is because if you actually look at Wild Lake Middle School, it was originally built with a planetarium in the middle. It's got a very strange circulation. It's on multiple levels. So if you were to bring it up to current code, and you have to when you renovate it, the cost to bring it up to ADA compliance, the cost to put the right amount of space there, all the other code compliance, it would actually cost you more. And when I say cost you more, I'm factoring in the amount of state funding that we would get. We get more state funding by building a new school than by renovating the old school. So the net effect to the county is we would actually pay less from a county perspective by building a new school. And oh, by the way, we get out of that a couple hundred extra seats for students. We get a brand new school. So it just made a lot of sense in that case. It doesn't make a sense. We've only built 2 replacement schools in the last 10 years, I believe. All of the renovations that we have done have all been to existing schools that we just gut them and start over again because it is cheaper for most schools to renovate. Yeah.
Are the growth projections for school-aged kids in this new area substantial? Are there going to be a lot more kids?
Yes. There's a lot of debate about just how many kids are going to be generated out of the new development in Columbia, but the fact is the existing schools are already popping at the seams with just the growth that's already there. So when you add in, it just depends upon how fast those projections are actualized. I'm kind of in the middle. I think that it's not going to be as dramatic perhaps as some people think, but certainly we're going to see growth coming out of the new.
We do have one empty building in that area too, don't we? The
Faulkner Ridge site. Yeah, it's basically has to be leveled and start over, but we do have a site in that area that we could start over with. Small site, yeah, 10 acres. So, again, bringing back you to Jeff's slide, we have great development going in. We have all sorts of, good stuff that are going to draw people. But if we expect those people to come and to stay, basically I'm saying, do we expect that we're going to be able to maintain Class C schools for Class A people and businesses? And I think eventually, for the betterment of the county, what has drawn a lot of people to Howard County is the school systems. And some people would say you can teach in a school box. Well, that's true to some extent. But I can tell you that there's a lot of people who are concerned today who've expressed their opinions to the superintendent and myself at the recent redistricting hearings about Wild Lake Middle School. They say it needs replacement, it needs lots of things. And those people are considering taking action on themselves, to do something, move away, move to another private school, whatever it is. And so, I really believe that, we have to reinvest not just in this, but in these schools. And it's expensive. I mean, if we're going to replace Wild Lake Middle School and we're going to renovate Swansfield, that's $50 million. That's our entire local contribution for 1 year. And that's not considering the other 73 schools in the school system. So do I have an answer? Not particularly, but here's what the summary of all this from my perspective. I think the county has done just a tremendous job of funding over the last 25 years. I'll stack our infrastructure school system against anybody in Maryland. I think we've done a fantastic job, and that's because the county has funded it. I think we do have a better than most backlog of deferred maintenance. But if you expect, and let me go back to this slide here. If you expect to maintain the level of funding at the same level it's been for the last 10 years and it to meet the needs for the next 20 years, it's a dream. I mean, we can't do it. Costs are going up, needs are going up. We have to figure out a solution. I don't have the solution, but level funding is not going to do it. So that's my brief. Any questions? Yeah.
So is all this build funded with county and state money? Is there ever any private money involved?
Very little. There's, the only private money that's actually gone to construction since I've been here that I can remember is the James Rouse Theater. That was built as a collaboration between the Columbia the Arts Foundation and the school system in the county. But that was a very small piece of the overall building. And other than that, there's been a land contribution recently, but no contributions to construction. Now that's a function of law, for one thing, and policy. Anne Arundel has done that to some degree. They've said, we'll open up the AppFo chart if you give us money. So that's a possibility. We could, there is some things you can do that changes, code or changes law or changes the way that we do things that might incentivize some private contribution.
Thank you. Jim, you want to come up and why don't you hit escape? What? Just hit escape and then minimize it. Then minimize it, yeah. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Jim Irvin, Director of Public Works. I've been with the county for a lot of years, and I could take Ken's presentation and clone it for Public Works. And
hey Jim,
magnify
can I ask you to stay on this side, please?
The difference is that Ken has prevailed more than I have in terms of how much money, because he has a constituency that demands that the county do something about it. We have very few people that want their roads repaved unless they fall apart, and this spring we'll probably have a few show up because they are going to fall apart because of the cold weather this year. So the dilemma that we face is that it's like talking about the weather. You can complain all you want, but what can you do about it? And the reality is, between the school system's needs, the park system's needs, the library systems, the community college, you put all that together and there's a huge demand, and how do you go about dealing with it? The reality is, if you look at the capital budget for the last 5 to 10 years, we've come up short. And every year we talk about, Ray doesn't even like to talk to me anymore about this issue. I'm not, his only thing that he ever tells me is no. So that's the reality. So the question is, what do you do about this? We have just as probably even worse situation than the school system has, because we have actually deferred maintenance. We've deferred many projects in our system, and sooner or later the day of reckoning is going to be here. The systems, we go through and analyze our facilities just like the school system does, They all have finite lives, and if you don't spend that regular routine maintenance money, you end up dealing with the replacements, as Ken has talked about. So we go through all those issues, and we don't get the funds to deal with that, so we make do. We've had a lot of issues in the last 3 weeks in our facilities with pipes breaking, HVAC systems falling apart, and it's just like shocking. How could this happen? And to bring it down, we can talk about the road system, and it's not going to get resolved here. I could just kind of paint the picture of what we're looking at for next year. We have, besides all the things that Ken wants, we have a court system that's an albatross to me. Lonnie and I have been getting beat up by the judge for about the last 2 years about what are we going to do about this. They have, their volume has grown. They need another judge to deal with the case law. There's constitutional issues about speedy trials, and so another judge, but there's physically no place to put another courtroom in that building.
We're talking about the circuit court,
Circuit
which is
court, not
down
the district.
about
Those of you
a mile down the
that
road.
have not been blessed with being in the court system, it's a building that's almost 200 years old. It's been renovated many years. It's built out of granite. It's very difficult to deal with it. And so the question is, it's going to take at least $30 million to add an addition onto that facility. So that's just one building that its time has come. So what do you do when you have $100 million or 120 or whatever the number is? You take one school, one community college building, and you broke the bank, let alone deal with the court system. And then we have our infrastructure for public buildings. We've finally renovated this building after probably 20 years beyond when we should have. We have 2 other major facilities, the Dorsey building and the Gateway building all have major issues with them and need renovations. So we've been struggling with a lot of different people to come up with a real estate strategy. And we have one of our esteemed consultants here working with us to try to talk about what to do about real estate, whether to build more buildings, to sell them, to trade them, to swap them. And so it's a very difficult thing because there's so many moving pieces, but we need to spend some money on our real estate, and we're not doing that. So it can't compete because we don't have the constituency to say, let's go out and have more county employees in a new nice building. That just doesn't happen. So what do? We try to, for me, the most important thing is to have some kind of idea about some consistency about what kind of funding we're going to have so we can kind of plan our future out. And that's very difficult to do because we've focused on new facilities over the last 10 years, the parks, the new libraries, and the new schools. That's been the emphasis that we've had, and very little renovations occurred. So I think the longer-term solution, there are systems in place to make decisions about how you allocate your resources from a maintenance standpoint. We don't do it. They're called asset management systems, but it requires a discipline to say we're going to follow that protocol to do that. And so that's the challenge we have, and that's what I guess where you come into the picture is, well, how do we make this very difficult choice of choosing between fixing your roof or taking the summer vacation kind of mentality we have here for new facilities versus maintenance. And we struggle with that because there's a lot of pressure in a lot of different parts of the county to do different things. And so we end up taking the hit on not getting capital dollars and using all of our operating expenses to try to make do. Over this weekend, it was like, because of the cold temperatures, typically we average probably 3 or 4 water main breaks a week. We were going to 4 and 5 at the same time, on the evenings and nights, and when the wind was blowing. You haven't lived till you've been out on a water main break in the middle of the night when it's 10 degrees out, and that's because our systems are aging. We have the same issues with our storm drain systems. We were just in this room yesterday commiserating about, well, we have all these new mandates and still don't have enough money to deal with it. So how do you make those choices? And that's really what it would be very helpful for you to weigh in on how we make, what are the policy decisions, and how do you go about making decisions when you have too much stuff to do and not enough funding. And I think one of the keys is, again, is an asset management approach where you systematically analyze, is it better to spend a little bit more this year on maintenance versus letting things go, and then you have to replace them, as Ken talked about in some of our buildings. The infrastructure that's out there, most of it's hidden. People don't realize, but roads have a finite life in them too. They last on, if it's really built really well, and things that there haven't been too many water main breaks in it or whatever, it should last 15 years before you have to resurface it. We're not anywhere near getting close to 15 years. We're way beyond that. So we had a big bump in the last 2 years for money, but before that, we virtually had hardly any resurfacing being done in the county. You will see that this spring because it's cold. We're going to see a lot of potholes, and people are going to be outraged about the condition of the roads. And so that's one of the dilemmas is do you spend a little bit more each year in terms of the assets, or do you wait till they fail and have to reconstruct them? So we struggle with those choices, and then we struggle between even types of facilities. Do we spend the money on the buildings, or do we spend it on the road systems, roofs? I really think that's you lose your roof, you're screwed. You can have the best HVAC system in the world, but once it gets wet, it doesn't work very well. And so that's one of our dilemmas as to how do we go about prioritizing, how do we fix things? We have issues with heating. These buildings we have in the county have to work every day of the year. People rely on them. So when the elevators break, like they have at Gateway, people get outraged that they have to walk up and down the stairs. We have to spend probably $300,000 replacing the Gateway elevators. They're way past their age. It's something that's just one little thing, but that's like half of our HVAC, or half of our infrastructure budget in the Bureau of Facilities, just taking care of those issues. So we've been advocating for a stock of money to do systematic repairs in our buildings to try to come up with a plan, and it's very, very difficult to do because it's just not at the top of the list. So really the message here is that we do have issues. We're never going to have enough money to solve them. And so we have to have some way of prioritizing how you go about doing that. And that's, unfortunately, we tend to look at things in the silo history of, we'll look at roads, we'll look at buildings, we'll look at schools, look at the college, but we don't look at things holistically about the county. Where does you get the best return as a business here? And that's one of the struggles that we face here in the county. We have a lot of issues, too, with neighborhoods. The other challenge, just like in downtown, the Columbia neighborhoods are turning 40, 50 years old almost, and their infrastructure is starting to significantly deteriorate. The water systems that were built in the early villages were built with asbestos cement pipe. And that was a great product back then. There was a debate about whether they're good or bad, or whether you should use it or not. But reality is, between that and the ductile iron pipe that we have in some of our other systems, they're rotting away, and we have to replace them. So the question is, when we go back into Wild Lake, for example, which is on the list to replace the utilities in there, you're going to dig up the roads. So the question is, what do you do with the rest of the infrastructure? Just put the pipes in, resurface the road, and move on. Well, the road doesn't meet the current reality. In this day and age, we don't build roads as wide as we do back then. The issues of sidewalks, bike lanes, the storm drain systems, everything is different now. So the question is, do you try to do this comprehensively or one system at a time? And that's another huge struggle, because a simple project to just replace a utility may be easily achievable, but when you're talking about rebuilding an existing neighborhood, it becomes a huge complex issue that has a lot of overtones. And so we have debated about whether we should go back into these neighborhoods. If we're going to do this, why not do it the right thing and do everything together, because you could save a ton of money, but it may delay the inevitable of fixing things. So we struggle with that. We just went through at Verizon, our friendly service provider went through and put a lot of new assets in the community, caused a lot of damage in different places, and there's an example of doing things piecemeal, where when maybe systematically we could have all worked together to have a better impact on a neighborhood. We were required to, there's been changes in the ADA law in terms of sidewalks and accessibility. Every time we go in to resurface a road now, we have to go back and bring all the ADA components up to current standards, which means replacing all the crosswalks, the curb and gutter issues, and the sidewalks were built too small. We have to put larger ones in to meet those standards. So it's a huge we've lost about 20 to 30% of our resurfacing budget just to bring in that component of the system up to snuff. So again, it's a systematic issue that we have to focus on. There's very little constituency to do those types of, so let's get this done now. And so it's a real challenge for us. And again, the key to me is finding a way to allocate the money to get the best return. And we don't have a system in place to do that. We've struggled too with, as I talked about, real estate. We've been working for the last 2 years on a real estate strategy. It's between the school system and the college. We just bought a building for them, help with their facilities. But the question is, we all have needs in the county, but historically, we've all looked at them independently. And we've had this little sea change in approach here. At least we're still talking, like Ken. We haven't walked out on each other. But say, well, we really need more administrative space. Well, why is the school system doing something independently of the county? So we've been trying to figure out, is it better to develop real estate together, that we get a better price instead of having duplicate facilities. We have the same issue with maintenance. We built Ridge Road, which is a joint facility, one of the first ones we've had in the county.
That's the vehicle maintenance.
Vehicle maintenance facility on Ridge Road, where we share fuel islands and repair shops, and it's worked out really well. It's a great way. We saved probably millions of dollars. It's just a simple cooperation thing. And so that's really the issue, is trying to look at things differently. It's very difficult to get the culture to change to do that, but that's really, to my mind, we have to force that solution on our organizations, is that individually, there's no way we're going to survive this demand. So we're trying to work together. I think it still needs a whole nother level of systematic approach to it, because it's just almost, again, it's like the weather. It's as cold as it is, but there's not much we can do unless we try to plan and work for this. So that's our challenge. And again, I would say, if you really want a flavor, just take a look at the capital budgets for the last few years, and you can see where our priorities are in the county. It's not on maintenance. So that's a really quick summary. I could go into a lot more, and I'd bore you and put you all to sleep, but it's a huge challenge, and Ray doesn't like to hear it anymore from me.
Let's see if we have some questions. Sure.
Jim, are there models in other jurisdictions around the country where counties like Howard are doing comprehensive asset management?
According to the consultants that come by peddling the systems, there are. I've been to a number of conferences where people are doing that, not countywide, but like on a road system. Some of the jurisdictions are doing asset management to manage their highway infrastructure. Now, there's probably a few that do buildings, but I've not seen one county-wide or jurisdiction-wide with the whole. But that would be the ideal situation to do that.
As I understand your argument, you'd like to have that asset management system even piecemeal, if you can't get to comprehensive.
Well, I think I'd like to have the culture to say we're going to try to follow that, because it's a man who's saying, well, we should emphasize sidewalk repairs this year in lieu of something else. And that's sometimes that getting that consensus to say we get the best bang for our buck for doing that, versus, well, this has got a lot more visibility, a lot more appeal to the public. And that's the thing. We need some way to counter that issue we have.
For both the schools and the county, are these issues of deferred maintenance really a post-recession? I mean, has it happened since 2008, or has it been systemic and predates the recession? I mean, does it have to do with the slow revenue growth we've had as a county, or is it
Well, I'd say that
on its own or not?
It's been a long time, and AppFo probably focused, which is probably 15 years ago. That changed the culture in the county, where we said we're going to have an adequate school system, come hell or high water. And so the culture's been, we're going to spend the money on number one, the education system, and so it's been that way for probably 20 years.
And not only we're going to spend it on education, but we're going to spend it on seats. And then if we have something left, we'll,
Looking back into history, I guess it's been almost 20 years now. When the AppFo was put in place, there was a big, I guess, the county executive at the time, Chuck Ecker, brought together all the players and made them sit in a room for over a year until they figured out how to do it. And what they came up with is what I call the Great Compromise, which was the county said, we will build all the seats that are necessary to maintain class size. And the development community agreed to have placed on them a development excise tax for road construction. The problem, and that has worked pretty well. I think that what has changed is when the AppFo committee was doing its work, we were supposed to reach maximum capacity in our school system by about the year 2000. Obviously that didn't happen. And we've allocated about $150 million of road construction that's been funded by the road development tax. The problem is that tax is kind of tapped out, that we were leveraging it forward by issuing bonds and then using the revenue from the development tax to pay the debt service on those bonds. The problem is that our current projections from that development tax use all of the money available to pay the debt service on the bonds that we have already issued for road construction or are about to issue for road construction. And so the question is are there new or different revenue sources to supplement that? Over the last 10 or 15 years, we've done, I believe, despite what Jim says, a pretty good job of maintaining our infrastructure in terms of building the roads that have been necessary to maintain the good traffic flow. A good example of that, I think, is that the interchanges on Route 29 are there because we had money to match the state's money. And so in Howard County, on Route 29, there's one traffic light. And that is sped, and some of the third lanes on Route 29, the third lane on Route 32 were all funded with county funds, even though they're state roads. I don't
The
know.
bulk of the excise tax has gone to state highway construction. The theory when the AFO tax was passed was that the state was spending a regular amount of money on infrastructure and highway upgrades. We did an analysis of what they were doing versus the needs, and it looked like there was a shortfall of about $6 million a year in terms of meeting the needs in the county, provided everybody continued to do what they thought they were doing historically. So the tax was designed to come up with $6 million a year. Shortly thereafter, we built the 3 big interchanges, and the state stopped funding new highway construction, and we ended up basically all the other additions came out of the county pot. So we have focused primarily on upgrading the state system, because the reality is as soon as people stop, you get gridlock on the main roads, people go through the neighborhoods as the alternate. So we felt it was easier and it's much more bang for the buck to keep upgrading those roads to keep people out of commuting through the neighborhoods. And so we're back to that reality again, where people are now driving through the neighborhoods to get around the roadblocks and Route 29 and other places every morning. There's some of you are probably the culprits to that too. But that's the excise tax.
Roads, Jim, so we go finance them with bonds, and then the money coming in from the excise tax services the bonds?
Yes.
And what you're saying is that all the revenue that's projected to come in the near future for this excise tax,
The next 20 years, 25 years.
is already spoken for by projects we've done.
Just about all of it, yeah.
25 years?
Yeah. With Jeff's help, we're projecting our development process and our development revenues through 2030. And we've projected
They're all taken up on debt service, so there's no new bonding possibility for 25
very
years?
little, yeah, that's the issue, I think.
Wow.
So we're not going to be building too many new roads in the county. We just took the bids on the last.
Reese had a question, then I think Lonnie
I
had a
think
question.
it was related to the question that was just posed. I guess my other question is around this time, is it a timing issue of when the spend occurs, or is it a total cost? So if you looked over the next 20 years, what was required?
Well, to me, you need to have some, everybody talks about predictability. We need a kind of constant revenue stream, plus or minus. In a lot of years, we got no revenue stream because of a very diminished amount of money to do this type of maintenance. And that's the issue, is we need to build some kind of component to manage these things, and that has to have some value to, how does this compare to all the other needs in the county? How do you value building a new school or a new park versus roof repairs? And that's really that's been our struggle, is how do we go about making those decisions in the county? And just on the road question, we just took bids this week on our last major road, which is Dorsey Run Road, $10 million project, and that'll be probably the last new road that's built in the county for the foreseeable future. I think just widening 95 is another like $100 million to put another lane. Our big next need is Route 70. We're getting killed because of the 70-29 issues and Route 40 in this area. People are just, if you go, anybody who travels there, they have just tremendous impacts in the neighborhoods with because that road is not upgraded. And that's another probably $50 to $100 million to fix that, and that's just not in the cards right now. We did get the Route 29 widening as part of the gas tax, so we'll get part of the third lane built. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Jim?
I thought it would be a bad cleanup because I'm the only one with money.
But not enough.
Well, yeah, that's true. I'm Jim Caldwell. I'm the stormwater manager for Howard County. I've been here a couple years now. I came from Montgomery County that has had a stormwater utility fee, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit, since early 2000s, but that doesn't mean that they've got their problem solved. And anything I tell you today, you could go to any other county and probably hear the exact same story because we're all in the same situation. And when Jim was talking about the need and the competition, well, you can imagine when you drive on the road and you see a pothole, you want it fixed. When your schools don't have enough classroom seats, you want more classroom seats. Very few people realize what's going on in the stormwater situation, and it is generally, historically has been a general fund item, but with you look at all the competition between schools and public safety and everything else, it obviously was one of the last utilities that was ever really recognized that it needed money. And even if there was money allotted for it in a capital budget or in an operating budget, if something came along that was a big snowstorm or more potholes that year, whatever it was, it usually lost its funding. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a primer. I know some of you in the room know this stuff, but I figure because it's kind of the forgotten utility that you need to kind of understand why we did this, and since all of you probably thankfully paid your stormwater utility fee recently, I want you to understand why you did that. Chesapeake Bay Watershed, everybody knows it exists. Probably, maybe some people don't know that it goes all the way up into New York. It covers 6 states and the District of Columbia, and all of those states have the same permit system to try and improve the Chesapeake Bay, and that's the MS4 permit, which I'll talk about a little bit about one of the mandates that we have to meet. You can't talk about the Chesapeake Bay unless you talk about the first Westerner that ever visited there, and there's the reason that I put this up here is because if you want to try and understand what we're trying to do or where we were with the Chesapeake Bay, you gotta kind of understand where it was. And when John Smith visited the Chesapeake Bay in 1607, it was the largest resource for fish and aquatic wildlife that probably existed. It was one of the best estuarine systems within the world. There are stories in his logs of attempting to fish with frying pans because the fish were so thick in the bay. They weren't very successful, as you can imagine. The fish didn't really cooperate too well. But they did fish with their swords, which tells you how deep and how dense the fish were in the bay at that time. So when he did his tour, this is what he saw. This is what a Piedmont stream should look like. And in Howard County, when he came through here, there were probably 90% of the county was covered with forest. Probably every stream in the county was a naturally reproducing brook trout stream. This is the coastal plain. This is what a coastal plain river is supposed to look like. Coastal plain is a more sandy soil. We have the more clay soils. That's what he saw. Fortunately, we do have still some of these streams that you can find in very minimum locations. We call them reference streams because it's what we always try and refer back to, that if we're trying to improve our stream system, then that's what we look to do. And the importance of the stream system, which people have forgotten over the years of trying to save the Chesapeake Bay, is that for the last 35, 40 years, we've been throwing every single dollar, for the most part, into the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay. Putting new oyster fisheries in, putting new grasses in, and every time we get a big storm, all these streams that are not being taken care of flush out the main stem, and all that work is abolished, and we start over again. So fortunately, somewhere along the line, somebody finally realized if we protect the streams, the bay will take care of itself. So I think there's been a shift in what we're trying to do, which is why there's so much more focus from the state of Maryland on pushing us to improve our stream systems. So, how did it happen? Population is how it happened. All of the imperviousness is in our county as a result of the amount of the population increase we've had. Since World War II, obviously, our population has geometrically gone crazy. Again, we're not alone. You can look at the state of Maryland. You can look at any other county in one of the major metropolitan areas, and the population curve looks about the same thing. To give you an example of what that means, this is Route 29 in 1965. It's Howard High School. That's the same Route 29 in 2011. All that impervious cover needs to go someplace when it rains. All that water, and it's not the rain, guys, it's the runoff that causes the problem. It's not a rain tax, it's the runoff that causes the problem. We could have all the rain we want, and if we had those systems that John Smith saw, we would have the buffering capacity to deal with it. But when you cover everything with impervious area, it's got to go someplace. The interesting thing about the state of Maryland is up until 1985, there were no stormwater regulations. So basically what we did was we got the water off those impervious areas as fast as possible and let it go. Which is why there's a lot of stream erosion today, because until 1985 there was no requirement to what you were supposed to do with that water. And basically what we were looking at it, and Public Works looked at it, is it was a public safety issue. Get it off the road so it doesn't freeze, it doesn't cause water ponding, doesn't flood, and then there was very little attention paid to what happened to the streams. So the history, get it off the road. Then it came to the point and said, you know what, we really need to do something with that. We just can't let it run off the roads and go nowhere. So then we started into this large regional pond system. Columbia, large regional pond system. Everybody knows the lakes, they're really ponds, they're really stormwater management facilities. Then after that, they decided, geez, you know what? Okay, now we've tried to control the water flow and the quantity of water that gets back into those streams. We haven't done a dadgum thing about the quality of that water. And anybody who pays attention to any parking lot or any impervious area, any roof, it collects pollution. And so when it rains, all that pollution washes off that impervious area and goes right into a stream. And then it has an effect on all the aquatic species that live in that stream. So quality became an issue. And so that's when we started building forebays to the ponds to try and collect all the debris so they were easy to clean out. We put in sand filters that kind of just like a car filter for your oil, kind of filters through everything. And riparian buffers, which are nothing more than trees along streams. Fancy word, but it'd probably be easier. More people would understand if we said trees along streams. Because they actually catch that water, don't let it go directly into the stream. One of the problems we have throughout the state is people who live close to those streams, they like to cut those buffers down because they like to see the stream. A lot of those buffers are owned by the government, but there's not been a big enforcement program to actually address that issue. And when you go back and you try and put those riparian buffers back in, everybody starts complaining about mice and rats and snakes and everything else. But it's like, well, you know, that's kind of the equilibrium in the ecology of why the streams used to be really healthy. So now we're on to a situation, and this is the latest. In the year 2000, the state of Maryland revised their stormwater control design manual to basically look at things on a much bigger, smaller scale of house by house, impervious area by impervious area. Don't go for regional ponds, don't go for big filters. Try and control that water and get it back in the ground as fast as you can where it originated from, which is what a forest does, which is what happened in the old days when most of this estate was covered by forest. Get the water, soak it back into the ground, don't let it run off, don't take it to a pond and then try and bleed it out of a pond, but get it back in the ground as soon as you can. So in Howard County, of course every day these statistics get outdated, but currently we have about 5,000 stormwater management structures in the county. We have over 23,000 storm drain inlets, and obviously it's got to go somewhere, so we probably got at least half of that in outlets at the same thing. We have 700 miles of pipes and drainage ditches, and when we did an inventory of the amount of the forgotten utility, those pipes and swales that actually make up the stormwater system, we have an infrastructure asset of over $660 million in pipes and ponds and everything else that we as a county control and have to manage, and we have no utility structure to deal with it. So the problem is, we've got stormwater regulations that basically tell us we've got to do more. We know what we're supposed to do, we know how to do it, it's just that the money has been a difficulty. And like I said, unlike water, sewer, electricity, or any other major utilities, we have to control, to help society manage its infrastructure. We didn't have a utility structure to help deal with all that infrastructure. And the other difficult thing is, obviously, as everybody knows, if you repair your house, it costs more than if you built it the first time right. If you repair a road, it always costs more. And as Ken said, you know, there's this line of when you do your repairs, and if you start it off the right way, it's much cheaper than when you got to come back in and do it again. And that's what we're stuck with doing, is a lot of repairs to what we're doing, what our infrastructure is currently looking like. So, amount of impervious area in the county. If you take all the impervious area in Howard County and you squeeze it into an island, it's about 18,500 acres of impervious area, obviously scattered everywhere. But if you push it all into one island, it's 18,500 square acres. 38% of that has stormwater control. 62%, 11,500 acres, has no stormwater control associated with that impervious area. So basically the water goes where it wants to, usually causing erosion and carrying pollution as it runs. What does that do? It does this. The interesting thing when I go around the county and talk, a lot of people don't realize that this is not what a Piedmont stream is supposed to look like. A Piedmont stream is supposed to look like what John Smith saw it looking like. That's the way nature designed it. This is the way we have impacted it. This is all erosion caused by uncontrolled stormwater getting into these streams and just eating them away. So this sediment and all the pollution and the nutrients that are in these soils go right downstream, and eventually when they find a place where they can settle out, which is usually the bay, they settle out in the bay. So it's causing erosion everywhere, causing trees to fall in, and you know, when we start hearing about it is when this kind of thing happens. It starts affecting somebody's backyard. But it's also having an impact on our infrastructure. Sewer lines, exposed, not supposed to be, creates another potential hazard because once it's exposed, it can be hit by a rock, it can be hit by a kid with a hammer, and suddenly sewage is now added to the mix of the pollution coming out. Some of our ponds, because of the age, we've lost the infrastructure to control that water. And you can see some, and I guarantee you that this manhole was not exposed when it was built, but now we see the whole thing, which just adds to more problem. This has actually been repaired, but this is Route 100. This is runoff coming off of Route 100, a state highway. So they tell us what to do, but then they have their own problems as well.
How does the state, how's runoff from the roads handled?
Well, it's supposed to, today it's all handled much better than it was, but it's all supposed to be managed and controlled. There are design standards that they have to put in place when they build a road, and they know the imperviousness. And
if we look on Route 100, the construction this winter, the backhoes, that's infiltration practice. The state has a TMDL mandate too, and they're just spending lots of money to do infiltration, but you can see that right on Route 100 right now.
Well, I'm saying all the roads that are existing now, is that stormwater treated or it just runs off and goes wherever it wants?
Depends. 62% of it is not treated. It's part of the impervious portion.
That's in your calculation?
Yep. It's part of what's going on, and we're trying to manage. And that's what Jim was saying. That even on Route 40, if you look in the medians of Route 40 as well, they're putting in sand filters all along that way to try and catch some of that water and start to treat it better than it's been treated in the past. So everybody's familiar with this picture of the Chesapeake Bay. I call it the Cafe au Lait Bay. This is what happens after every rainstorm, and the reason it happens is because of all that erosion. And so what we're now trying to do is, if we prevent this, I have always said the bay is a biological system. It eventually will take care of itself, but we've got to prevent that, and the only way to do that is to work way back in these counties that don't even have a border on the bay, and to clean up our streams. And there's lots of solutions. There's the easy stuff that we all can do. And this is the stuff, when we go out, we talk to people, say, be part of the solution. It's like the old days when they used to say, if every house put a fluorescent bulb in their house, how much energy, less energy on a national basis we'd use. Well, this is the same kind of thing. If everybody tried to do this, the problems would get better. But these are the things that cost money, and these are the things that have to happen. And I always think that the hardest solution of all is behavior change. We realized that when we sent the bills out, because we had a lot of behavior issues that we had to deal with from people. Okay, there are solutions. We're working on those solutions. We know what they are. We just need to do more of them. Stream restoration, these are all actually before and after pictures. We do restore streams. We can restore streams. We try and bring them back more into that picture that we saw of the John Smith visit. So when he comes back, he'll say, God, something's working right. we get credit, as I'll talk about, we have a permit that's given to us, and that permit requires us to do this type of work. And so what it's telling us is we have to manage uncontrolled impervious area.
So talk a little bit about the permit. The permit is from whom?
The permit's from the state. I'm going to get to that. I just want to show you the fact that we know what we're doing. It's just in case we don't have money to do it. Parking lots, uncontrolled impervious. This parking lot used to run right into the woods and cause erosion. We've now built this pond with a forebay, catches the sediment. These grasses in here actually eat up some of the nutrients, and then it trickles out. Bioswales, this used to be the thing to do. This was get it out of the way as fast as you can, build a culvert and shoot it out of there. Imagine the velocity that picks up when it comes through one of these channels. We've now created the same site. Step pools, basically, these are there's no concrete in the bottom of these. It steps through these pools, soaks into the ground, and eventually it slows the water down, and a lot of it gets back into the ground faster. This is Cedar Lane Park parking lot. This new facility is right behind these two cars. Basically, it's a bioretention facility, like a giant rain garden, except it has an under-drain system in it, so that if it gets too much water in it, it will drain out. But all these plants help filter the pollution out of it. Pond retrofits, this is the same pond, you're just looking at it from the riser structure in different angles. This is what it did look like. Maintenance problem, yes, we have stormwater maintenance as well as everybody else does. This is the new concept, again, a kind of a cell system where it just travels through and slows the water down and has a chance to soak in, and also, and then the community system, the rain garden, which everybody's heard about. When we first started this process of how we're going to deal with Chesapeake Bay, we said, well, just build rain gardens. In order to deal with what we have to deal with in Howard County, we have to build about 50,000 of these things. Not going to happen. The other thing you need to look at when you look at these things is consider the diverse aspect of maintenance, because each one of these things needs to be maintained. This type of technology requires a heck of a lot more maintenance than the old system of building stuff in concrete and every once in a while trying to scrape out the sediment. Each one of these has to be maintained probably every 2 to 3 years. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of education, but it is part of the solution, but it is not the solution. So, why are we doing all this? Because unlike these other systems where we have to, amongst ourselves, figure out what the ratio is of how much we put into schools and how much we put in public safety, we're kind of being told to do this. Starts with our MS4 permit, that's Municipal Separate Stormwater Sewer System permit. It is a permit we've received our first one in 1995, I think. They're 5-year term permits. The last permit we received was in 2010.
We need a permit to discharge stormwater.
We need a permit to discharge stormwater. We are responsible as a government for all of the impervious area runoff water and the quality of that water across the county, whether or not we had an impact on it or not, whether or not we can control something come off of private property. We are held responsible for that through this permit. And it kind of delineates a series of things we have to do. In addition to that permit, we have this TMDL.
That permit is from the federal level, right?
The permit is actually it's from the Clean Water Act, but it's delegated to the state of Maryland, so we get it from MDE. We also have a TMDL, which again is out of the Federal Clean Water Act.
What does TMDL stand for?
Hang on.
Okay.
TMDL is total maximum daily load, which means nothing to anybody. So what everybody has said, it's like a pollution diet. It's basically how much pollution you can put into any stream segment. And that's all calculated out and modeled out, and they tell you exactly what you can do. And this is a bay-wide TMDL, but they push it back up into each individual county so that we have our standards and criteria that we have to meet through this TMDL, which are different than what we're meeting in our MS4 permit, but is enforced through our MS4 permit. So then when they gave us these two things, they said, you know what? That's a heck of a lot of stuff we've asked all these counties to do, so we better figure out that they really have a plan to do it. So that's what our WIP is. It's this leather thing. It's actually the watershed implementation plan. And that plan, each county has to do to tell the feds and the state how we're going to do this. So then once they started getting these plans and they said, you know what? We don't think anybody's got enough money to do this. Certainly not as the forgotten utility that has no money to accomplish anything because it's all divvied out in other areas of the responsibilities of the county government. So that's where House Bill 987 came in 2012, highly contested. I think it was like at 11:54 of the night, last night of the state legislature met that year, that they passed this bill. It was not exactly well thought out, but it is what it is. And we were challenged, along with 9 other communities, and those communities were the largest communities in the state of Maryland, to come up with a funding mechanism to pay for all this work that needs to be done. And we had a task force much like this, where we sat around with folks from across the county and sat down and said, here's the challenge, how do we get it to happen? We looked at various models, we came up with what we thought was the fairest system. We sold it to the county executive, who asked for the legislation to be introduced by the county council. The county council met, debated it, passed it, and then everybody went crazy. Once the portions of the community found out about what was going on, they got very upset. They came to the county council literally in mass, and I think kind of like shocked the council into the fact that they didn't like the way that this system was set up. So the council changed it, and in July, they passed what they referred to as a simplified process from the one we had originally developed. But the one we originally developed was supposed to bring in $18 million. The one we ended up with brought in about 10, which I'll go into. So how did we start to figure out how much money we needed? Because everybody's heard, oh my God, it's going to cost $1 billion per county. Frederick's going to cost $2 billion. It's going to cost us $500 million. How do these numbers come about? Well, they are all wicked extrapolations at this point. And what we find is that the more we get into this and dig into this, those dollars are coming down. That's not to say that it's still not a huge financial impact, but it's not what we originally had expected. Part of that is because the rules of the game are changing, and part of that, I think, is because the state and the feds realize what they had originally anticipated we were supposed to accomplish couldn't be done with all the other responsibilities that are going on in the counties. But so right now, to take an acre of impervious area, it costs about, on the average, with all the different techniques we have to manage that, on the average it costs about $75,000 per acre. Under our permit, it requires that of that 11,500 acres that are not managed, in the next 5 years we have to manage 20% of that, or we have to find a way to manage 2,350 acres of impervious area, multiply that by 75,000, this is the number in the next 5 years. That's just the capital money needed to meet that demand. It has no maintenance in that number. It has no outreach and education in that number, which we're not going to be able to accomplish just without bringing the community with us. And it has no inspections or anything associated with that. So you take those programs and you add that in there, and we're looking at a 5-year permit cost right now of about $200 million, or $40 million a year through that 5-year permit cycle. But, like everything else, it's subject to change. We anticipate that as this moves forward, there will be more grant money available from the state of Maryland. They will change some of the rules and regulations about how we take credit for this stuff. As an example right now, if you do 100 feet of stream restoration, that equals 1 acre of impervious area managed, which is different than if you actually take a parking lot of 1 acre and build some sort of retention facility. So each one of these things, they get credits for that, and we have to figure out all these different tools, add them all up. And what I keep saying is we have this United Way campaign thermometer, and at the end, all the public wants to know is we're getting where we're supposed to go with the money that we've collected from them. Okay, so you can't see this. That doesn't really matter because this is, you've already paid this. Don't worry about it. This is, that's why it's blurred. Subject to change.
That's what they saw in 1154.
Basically, what this is, it just tells you how we develop the stormwater feed today. And it's based on the size of your property, basically. If you live in a townhouse or condominium, it's $15 a year. If you live in a house less than a quarter acre, it's $45. If you live in a house more than a quarter acre, it's $90. If you're a commercial or a nonprofit, it is, for every 500 square feet of impervious area you have, it costs you $15. And that originally was, the whole system was like that because we felt impervious is impervious is impervious. It doesn't matter if you're a church, a house, or a Walmart. The effect is the same, so everybody should pay the same, but that's what was modified, and the council wanted a more simplified system for the residential. This is an example. This is actually Centennial High School and Burley Manor Middle School, but just as an example of how we do the commercial. So using GIS, we know what the impervious area on that parcel is. We divide by 500, which is the unit, and we come up with 1,435 units at $15. So if this was a commercial property, the fee would be $21,000 a year. That's how all of the commercial properties are calculated in the county right now. Okay, so what are we collecting with this? We're collecting $10,400,000 this year. We don't anticipate that that will change over the next couple of years, just because we don't think the council wants to step back into this right now. In addition to that, the way the law was written, House Bill 987, is that we had a maintenance of effort. We couldn't just take everything we had spent on stormwater and get a windfall and send it someplace else and say, wow, look at that, we found $7 million. So we had to take, was it 2012? 2012, whatever we spent that year, spent, not encumbered, but actually spent in stormwater, we had to add that to and continue to use that for our stormwater. In addition to that, we assume we're going to get about $2+ million a year in grants. So what we're looking at is an annual revenue of $19 to $20 million for stormwater and an annualized shortfall of $20 million, but understanding that that's if you take that $200 million and divide it equally in those 5 years. That's not the way it's going to happen. So this year, we're okay, because we're doing a lot of designing and a lot of idea building about what we need to do. Where we're going to see this is that year 1, year 2, $10, $15 million need. Year 3, 4, and 5 is when we start construction, and that's when the fees really go. I mean, that's when the cost really goes up. The fee maintains the same. So that's when we really start to develop some sort of a shortfall that we will realize. But
What happens if we don't do it?
well, we're going to do it. You're going to tell us not to do it.
$37,500
A day. Yeah, well, the interesting thing is when you look at that number, you could actually, for 5 years, not do what you're supposed to do and get billed $37,500 a day, and it's cheaper than meeting the demand, which, of course, we don't want to do. But that's, some counties are looking at that and saying that's a cheaper way to go. I was just reading a minute ago that the state is now going through the legislation right now, and as we all know, Carroll and Frederick County are up there saying, don't give us this. Anne Arundel's now added into it because they feel that they should have the option of figuring out how they're going to get this money in their own manner and not being told how to do it. The reality is we've had that option for 50 years. And this is what happens when you have the option. What you've heard today is the other demands of society are overwhelming to what needs to be done here. So I think those counties who have this fee, even if they pass legislation that said you don't have to have it anymore, we're not going to give it up. Because it's an infrastructure utility that has been needed for 50 years since we started putting stormwater infrastructure in the ground and just never had before.
So 500 square feet's the unit, and it's $15 per unit?
Mm-hmm. One thing I didn't, yeah, okay.
You said the council will have to come back to this in a couple of years to address our shortfall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the fee, the way the legislation is written, they could change the fee each year if they wanted to. It's just I don't perceive that they want to get back into it right now.
Certainly not next year.
Certainly not next year. But as time goes on, we are challenged under the, well, not challenged, we're required under the law to report to them each year what progress we're making, where we spent the money. This is a dedicated fund. It cannot be used for other purposes. In the law, it basically says you have 5 different areas of stormwater you can use it in, but you can't use it for anything else. So we couldn't get short on police cruisers and go buy a new police cruiser with the money if we had it. Yeah, Jim?
I think it's important to know that this fund is dedicated to nutrient reductions.
Yeah, that's true.
It has nothing to do with flood control or drainage.
That's a good point.
We've got inundated with people who have problems in their backyard saying, I'm paying the rain tax, come fix my backyard. And that's not what this is all about.
Yeah, this is quality.
There's still a whole issue about flood control and storm drainage, and nothing to do with that.
Yep.
Doug?
So the way the fee structure works, there's $15 on 500 square feet. If you were actually to restore that to state standards, what would that 500
Okay,
cost?
that's one thing I didn't mention is there is a credit program. There's actually a credit and a reimbursement program that's built into the law. The reimbursement program is if you decide either as a homeowner or as a commercial property that you want to do something to improve your property, we will reimburse you a certain amount of money to do that. And the best example is you're a resident, you want to build a rain garden. Rain garden on the average house costs about $2,500. We will reimburse you 50% of that cost up to $1,200. So that's a 50% reduction. The difficulty from the homeowner side is that you then can get a credit for having done that. But the credit is only 20% of your fee. So that if you're a $45 home and you build a $2,500 rain garden, we give you $1,200, and then each year after that you get an $8 credit off your $45, which, like, you know, there's not a lot of incentive. The original system had a greater incentive. Now, if you're a commercial property, on the other hand, First, there's a couple ways you can get a credit. One is if you have a site development plan that is after 2003, you can qualify for a 50% cut in your fee. The reason for that is after 2003 is when Howard County adopted the new design manual from the state of Maryland. And as a result of that, all those designs were built to standards that the state believes are the gold standard. So if they're doing what they can and they really can't do any more by design, then we'll give them that credit. On the other hand, if you're a property that was built in 1970 and you want to do something on your property, we will give you up to 50%, but it's based on the actual amount of impervious area that you've managed. So if you've got 10,000 square feet of impervious area and you manage 2,000 of that, we'll give you credit for that 2,000, but you're still going to pay the full fee on the remaining 8. So there is an incentive program in there, and we have a special program for nonprofits where they basically pay 0, but they agree to let us come on their property and do what we can do to manage stormwater. And as long as they agree to let us do that, we pick up large parking lots, large rooftops from a lot of the religious facilities, manage them, get credit for that against that 2,300 acres we have to get. And so it's a win-win for them and us. We're looking to do something with commercial as well to try and find out where the bright line is, where the payback is, where they're willing to put money into something, what we have to do to soften that pot so that the payback is enough for them to actually do that. Interestingly enough, the whole month of December, our phones are ringing off the hook. We were probably getting 30, 40 phone calls a day with very angry people saying, what is this? Why is this? You explain it to them like this, they kind of start to get it. And it really, it's a cup of coffee a month for most homeowners. It's really not that big of a deal. But once they start to understand it, they start to accept it a little bit more. We're getting very few calls from commercial folks. And yet their bills are the largest. And what we're sitting down with them to try to understand what's going on. And what we're thinking is a lot of that is because they're passing those costs on. And so what we're trying to do is figure out, okay, rather than pass those costs on, how do we bring you in to be part of the solution? And that's what the challenge is going to be for us. So, revenue shortfall, what are we going to do about it? Yeah.
I might have this wrong, but Virginia and Pennsylvania didn't do anything. Right?
Virginia and Pennsylvania, they have the same MS4 permit.
Yeah.
But they are not challenged, they were not given a law by their state to develop a utility. So that they're still trying to make this happen with general fund money or however else they're trying to raise that money. Which the concern is, I think for the people in Maryland, is we're stepping so far ahead of everybody else, but that's pretty much historically where Maryland has been in this whole environmental game.
So are they going to be hit with this, right?
They have the same permit. If they don't meet their permit, they're going to have the same liabilities that for not meeting their permit that we would. The difference is we now have at least some sort of a funding mechanism to get started where they don't. Yeah.
So where so even if Maryland does do everything that you can up from New York all the way to Pennsylvania and Virginia, if those states don't do what they need to do, then it seems like we're kind of taking 2 steps forward.
Well, it's the same argument that when I actually spent most of my career in Montgomery County, and we had like here we had the ozone problem, the ground level ozone problem a couple of years ago, and we used to argue that you could shut down the District of Columbia during a code red ozone day, and we would still violate because of all the pollution coming in from the Midwest. So unless the Midwest controlled their coal-fired power plants, we were still going to be a polluted state. It's the same kind of thing with the water here. The only thing we have to rely on is the fact that these are federal permits. And these federal permits, the federal government has put a lot of effort and is continuing to show that they have a lot of desire to improve the quality of the Chesapeake Bay, so they have to enforce those permits. And what Maryland has done is they've stepped forward and said, we know that's the issue, we're going to figure out how we can do it. And what we're hoping is that these other states, we have to only hope, because it's a federal mandate that they do it as well. And that's where the $37,500 hopefully comes in play.
Last question.
I just want on the credit for commercial properties. If you have an SDP, a site development plan, after 2003 or later, in essence, your fee is based on 1 unit's 1,000 feet instead of 5. It's just cut in half, right? Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
A lot of challenges. Lynn is scheduled to speak today. We'll let her go first next week. And I'll see you again on next Thursday.